Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 374. We're going to pick up where we left off on this morning's morning update and finish off our article from the Palm Beach Post. Now, earlier on this morning, we were taking a look at this indictment by the Palm Beach Post against Barry Krischer about how terribly his office conducted themselves in regards to the first prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, we know that the Department of Justice did their internal investigation, right? But that had nothing to do with the local state prosecutors. They had some opinions, but it wasn't an investigation into those state prosecutors. Now, Barry Krischer, from the very beginning of this, when we first started hearing information about the first case, has always looked like an absolute piece of trash. The way that he went about his business, the way that he was working hand in hand with the prosecutors to with the defense lawyers of Epstein to demean these girls is just mind-boggling. Now, I'm certainly not a scholar on the topic of law, right? And like I always say, I've never really followed any of these kind of cases before. But this can't be normal behavior. This can't be how police departments handle these sorts of allegations. Can it be? It would seem to me as if this is an outlier kind of situation out here, right? A situation that deserves a harder look. Everybody who took a look at this case, that was a lawyer or a judge or anyone else who is in the field of law, said it was garbage that this NPA was ever even administered. And as much flack as Acosta gets, I think Krischer really needs to start shouldering his own load here, folks. And this piece by the Palm Beach Post is very damning, and it cuts right to the heart of the matter. And that matter is these survivors and these girls that were abused were failed by the federal government and the state and local prosecutors. And that can all be rectified by the 11th Circuit Court. As we finish reading through this article and we reflect upon what we learned earlier in this morning's portion of this article, I don't see how anyone in their right mind could agree with this non-prosecution agreement being put in place. It should be done away with, and then all of these people who say that they're innocent should have their day in court, and they can defend their name that way. Hiding behind this non-prosecution agreement, hiding behind taking the fifth every single time that you're asked questions about Jeffrey Epstein, that's not going to get it done. People are going to have questions, and they're going to demand answers. So let's jump right back into this article, right where we left off. Krischer's decision to take the unusual step of presenting the case to a grand jury drew particular criticism from federal prosecutors. He should have never ever brought this before a grand jury. There was plenty of evidence to get an indictment in the public court. You didn't need to bring it into a grand jury to make it secretive. Why? Because Epstein had a bunch of dough? Because Epstein had all kinds of political power and all kinds of friends in high places? So that's why you made that move, huh? And it's so scummy. Even behind closed doors, they were manipulating things. Even behind closed doors in that grand jury room, those jurors only got to hear from one girl. And it wasn't even the 14-year-old girl. Can you imagine? Assistant U.S. Attorney Matthew Menchel, chief of the criminal division, told investigators that he understood that Krischer could have filed charges against Epstein directly, but didn't like the case. Didn't like the case, huh? So he doesn't like winning cases? He doesn't like slam dunk prosecutions where you go big game hunting to bring down people like Jeffrey Epstein? That's not a winnable case, huh? That's not the kind of case to pursue, huh? You got more drug cases to go after, right? You got to pursue your failed war on drugs for a little while longer, huh? It's an absolute joke that they would prioritize some of the things that they give priority status to, while at the same time ignoring shit like this and acting like I didn't have a case. There was a big case, a gigantic, huge case. It wasn't that you didn't have a case, Mr. Kersher. You didn't have the courage. You had a heart that is made of Charmin. You soft-ass, weak-ass, limp-wristed, sorry punk. He took the case to the grand jury to get political cover for either dropping it or letting Epstein plead to minor charges, Menschel told investigators. And you see what's going on here, right? It's a, he said, she said, blame the other guy type of routine. The federal prosecutors are pointing every single finger they own at Acosta and, at Kersher and the local prosecutors. And the local prosecutors, for their part, say, well, obviously the feds let this happen. The feds signed off on it. It was the feds. Nobody takes responsibility. The court refuses to make these people take responsibility so far. And so, this draconian bullshit, garbage, trash, non-prosecution agreement continues to hang in the air heavy over the whole entire proceeding. Assistant U.S. Attorney Andrew Laurie, who was Villafana's supervisor in the West Palm Beach office, was more critical. The state intentionally torpedoed it in the grand jury, so it was brought to us, he wrote in a May 2007 memo. Can you imagine the audacity, the cowardice, the lack of morality to willfully torpedo this case? And you mean to tell me that there's no recourse here? That Kersher, that Barry Kersher can't be held responsible here? This is far beyond negligence, folks. This is willful. He was willfully helping the defense to demean these girls, to defame them, and then to ignore their case and help Jeffrey Epstein avoid getting justice. In my opinion, and of course, remember, you can take that down to the local coffee shop with $1.50 and get yourself a coffee, right? But in my opinion, he aided and abetted Jeffrey Epstein's behavior by this ruling. For his part, Kersher said there was good reason to take the case to the grand jury. In 2006, he said his office filed prostitution charges against teens as young as 14. The law changed in 2016 when state lawmakers agreed that girls under 18 can't be charged with prostitution because they legally can't give consent. His office was bringing prostitution cases against girls that are 14, according to him. But they're not bringing those same cases against the Johns, who were obviously exploiting and abusing these young girls. Because remember, these little girls can't consent, right? 14-year-old girls certainly not consenting. 16-year-old girls certainly not consenting to be a prostitute. We're not talking about a 19-year-old dude or a 19-year-old girl who has sex with a 17-year-old boy or girl. That's a different story, right? That's gray area. There's all sorts of debate there. That's not the case here, okay? These girls are not prostitutes. They were not prostitutes then. It is unseemly that this is the way that they went about this case. We're talking, again, let's remember, folks, let's keep it in context what we're talking about here. We're talking about little high school girls that were involved in a pyramid scheme of sex, and they were considered prostitutes. What sort of backwards ass 7th century civilization type shit is that? The possibility that Epstein survivors could be prosecuted for prostitution caused great consternation within the office, Krischer told investigators. That's why he decided to take the case to the grand jury. That's such bullshit. That is such bullshit. You were the prosecutor. You're the one who decides what gets tried and what doesn't get tried. So don't try and use a cop-out. And you went to the grand jury, just like the article stated a second ago, for political cover. That's exactly what it was, what it's always been, and what it always will be. Cover your ass type of situation. You didn't care about these girls. You certainly didn't care about justice. There were so many issues involving the victim witnesses that, to my mind, in consultation with my prosecutors, the only way to achieve, to my mind, real justice to present the case to the grand jury and not direct file criminal charges against Epstein, Krischer told investigators. Such BS. If you're going to have the position that Krischer has, then have the fortitude. Have the backbone to make these decisions and go with it. How many poor people have you thrown in jail for a lot less, Mr. Krischer? How many drug addicts are rotting away in jail, Mr. Krischer? But yet Jeffrey Epstein doesn't get the full weight of the law thrown on him because the girls have MySpace profiles where they're drinking and they talk about boys? How does that hold up to anybody who is sensible? Despite Ryder's criticism, Krischer said the whole thing was put before the grand jury, investigators wrote. At the time, Krischer's office said that jurors were given a list of charges ranging from the most serious to the least. They settled on one count of solicitation of prostitution. Acosta said he was unaware that his own prosecutors believed Krischer had deliberately sunk the case. I mean, what sort of shit show is being run down there? You didn't know that these guys were going to torpedo the case, that was their intent? What were you doing down there, Mr. Acosta? Eating good food and hanging out on the beach all day? You certainly weren't prosecuting anybody, obviously. You were too busy to have meetings with your prosecutors to get a game plan about how to go after Jeffrey Epstein. But then again, it wouldn't have even mattered, right? If they would have came hard after Jeffrey Epstein, the result would have been the same. Mukasey's office would have killed this shit on the vine. I am so convinced of that at this point. But, he said, based on Krischer's actions, he worried that Epstein would get off with no jail time and no requirement that he register as a sex offender. That he told investigators would have been a manifest injustice. Breaking news, buddy! The whole entire thing's been an injustice. From the top to the bottom. All of it. And you, Mr. Acosta, played a big part in this coming to fruition. Not because you're the one who initiated it. Not because you're the one who decided that Epstein was going to get this plea. But because you didn't have the courage to stand up to your superiors. And you didn't have the courage to go public if they tried to force feed you this. That's why you're a bitch in my opinion. That's why you're a chump in my opinion. And that is why you had the rug pulled out from underneath you. You have to have some courage if you're in a position such as this, in my opinion. You can't just go with whatever way the wind blows. You can't do what's politically expedient. Sometimes hard decisions have to be made, and sometimes you need to be a hard-ass man or woman to make those decisions. And if you're not capable of doing this, then you should get yourself a job as an essential employee at Smith's or over at Vaughn's, or get yourself a job at a warehouse. Because it's obvious that Mr. Krischer was not built for this. The non-prosecution agreement called for an 18-month jail sentence, required Epstein to register as a sex offender, and forced him to settle civil suits filed against him by roughly 40 women who were identified as survivors. Now, one thing I want to see too, I want those grand jury records to be released, right? Those sealed grand jury records that the Palm Beach Post is trying to get right now down in Florida, amongst some other folks. I really want that stuff released because I think it will tell us quite the tale. It will add a lot more context, and it will be an important part of this story, in my opinion. And as far as the non-prosecution agreement, oh yeah, it called out for the payment, right, of some of these girls, but Epstein was going to also pay for third-party lawyers, and you really think these ladies were paid out, these girls were paid out the way they should have been? The way it's going to go down at that fund? Hell no. Zero chance that happened. These women basically got hush money that came along with this non-prosecution agreement. The government basically signed off on Jeffrey Epstein paying hush money. We should all be enraged about all of this. The agreement was far from ideal, Acosta told investigators, but it was adequate to serve as a backdrop to the state's prosecution, he said. It was a polite way of saying, encouraging the state to do a little bit more. That's such bullshit. You could have had providence over this case. You could have taken this case, had jurisdiction, and ran it however you saw fit. But you were scared of your superiors. You always had designs on other jobs. Obviously, you became the labor secretary. You weren't just laying at home one night and got a phone call for that, right? You had your eyes on a bigger prize. Therefore, you didn't want to make any waves over the Jeffrey Epstein case. So you just went along with it. You just went right along with it, Mr. Acosta. When you were told, oh, he's intelligence, hands off of him, you didn't question any deeper. You didn't go any harder. You didn't try and find, at the very least, a sliver of the truth. So don't come back now and start with the hindsight in 2020 and talking about how your office and the moves you made were in hopes of encouraging the state to do a little more. Shut up, all right? Just shut up. I don't want to hear it. Nobody else wants to hear it. You're inept. You have no courage. And you're going to go down as one of the biggest jokes in the history of federal prosecutors in the United States of America. And that is saying a lot, sir, considering some of the pieces of work we've had in those same positions. However, Villafana said even after the agreement was signed in September 2007, Krischer continued to try to derail it. In early 2008, Krischer told a manager in her office that he and defense attorney Goldberger had worked out a deal that would allow Epstein to spend just 90 days in jail. Just 90 days in jail. That's all. 90 days. People do a longer stint for not paying traffic tickets. And Krischer had a plan for Epstein to do a 90-day bid, huh? Tell me, how is this guy not being sued? Krischer should be being sued for personal liability over all of this. This is unseemly. I believe he's part of the private sector now. And if that's the case, I would try and sue him if I was these survivors, that he was so negligent in protecting, that he worked against, in fact. Please tell me that you were joking, Villafana emailed a colleague. Maybe we should throw Epstein a party and tell him we are sorry to have bothered him. Yeah, that's what they would have wanted, right? That would have been the proper route to go. Would have made your bosses up on high very happy. Oh yeah, let's make sure our golden goose is taken care of. Let's make sure Jeffrey Epstein, the asset, is well looked after. Even Villafana, for all of her wanting to do the right thing, didn't have enough backbone to do it. And that's what it comes down to, folks. There's no more time to cut corners here. There's no more time to skip around the truth. All of these people involved, Villafana, Menschel, Krischer, Acosta, and everybody in between, all hold their share of the blame. She said she called and emailed Krischer and Goldberger to tell them that the deal would prompt the U.S. Attorney's Office to dust off the 60-count federal indictment and file it against Epstein. Oh, big talk, Mrs. Villafana. How about that 60-count federal indictment was filed right away? Why was everyone playing grab ass in the park with this guy in the first place? Why didn't anyone have the courage to stand up, tell Mukasey and Philippe to get screwed, and tell the rest of these people, guess what? There is not a soul on this planet that is going to stop me from prosecuting you. But no, there was none of that. It was absolute garbage. Someone needs to talk to Barry, Villafana emailed her supervisors. Epstein survivors, who were already reluctant to stand up against their rich, powerful tormentor, were also convinced Krischer didn't take their allegations seriously, she said. That's for sure, on fact, on record, the girls have said that, right? Look, Krischer didn't take anything seriously here. His whole entire motivation was to protect Epstein and to make sure that this case went away as quick as possible. That was his motivation, not justice, not reparations for the survivors, and certainly not because it's his job. Early on, she said she tried to assure them that the federal investigation would be a different process than the one conducted by Krischer's office. The survivors felt that they had not been particularly well treated, she told investigators. And you know when I always talk about the missing girls, the girls who haven't come forward yet, this is a big part why. I think a huge step forward would be the non-prosecution agreement being trashed and the grand jury documents from the first case being released to the public in a transparent manner. I think that would go a long way with convincing some of these girls that have not come forward still to come forward and to confront those that abuse them and those that help them be abused. However, survivors would again soon be abused by the system. None was told about the non-prosecution agreement, nor were they alerted before Epstein pleaded guilty in Palm Beach County Circuit Court in June 2008. So you see the disrespect, the negligence, and the downright departure from humanity that occurred in this matter is prevalent, and it went on time and time again. The 11th Circuit Court finally has a chance to start fixing all of these wrongs, and I really hope they do. None was told about the pact or the plea hearing, in part because of the strange and uneasy relationship between state and federal prosecutors and Acosta's lack of leadership, investigators said. And again, that came from on high, right? Hands off. He's intelligence. Let the state prosecutors deal with it. Acosta's thinking, hey, I'm a company man, right? I work for the federal prosecutors. If the CIA is in control here, I better back the hell off. That's what he was saying in his mind, when in reality, a real man would have said, screw all of you. What are you, crazy? We got ourselves a prolific child abuser here, and I'm burying this son of a bitch underneath the jail. That's what a real man says. Still, controversy about those missteps were future concerns. When Epstein pleaded guilty to the solicitation of prostitution and solicitation of a minor for prostitution and was sentenced to 18 months in jail, Acosta considered it a job well done. He described it as a proud moment. Imagine that's a proud moment for you. What sort of mental condition are you suffering from if this is a proud moment for you? Villafana was far less effusive. After all the hell they put me through, I don't feel like celebrating 18 months, she said in an email to a colleague. He should be spending 18 years in jail. Her hell was far from over. Feds hoodwinked on work release. Within days of Epstein's plea, Villafana learned that Epstein was being held at the stockade, not the jail. Further, she was told that he was eligible for work release. I mean, imagine you worked on this case like Villafana, and remember, I'm not trying to demonize nor lionize her, right? Out of all of the people that worked on this case from the original team, she was the only one that seemed to even care. But I don't think she went far enough, right? That said, she certainly wasn't somebody who was okay with what went down. She wasn't somebody who was like, oh yeah, this is cool, we'll just move on, this is a job well done. And she was very vocal about that fact. And nobody in the office wanted to do anything about it. When you're a low-level prosecutor like her, you only have so much power, right? You have to go to your bosses, they go to their bosses. It's a huge, gigantic bureaucracy. So Villafana, while I don't find her to be a hero by any means, is certainly the only one that seems to be a decent person in this case. Months before Epstein pleaded guilty, federal prosecutors had made it clear that work release wasn't an option. Krischer said Epstein would be eligible for it because he wouldn't have had to register as a sex offender until after his sentence was complete. FDLE, which runs the registry, now disputes that, claiming registration occurs when a sex offender pleads guilty. Bing, bang, boom. Krischer needs to be held responsible for what happened here, folks. He really does. And I don't see enough talk about Krischer. I sure see a lot about Acosta, the low-hanging fruit, but I don't see enough about Krischer. And I'll tell you what, it's time to focus on this man and his role. Still, in November 2000, Krischer told federal prosecutors that if the work release prohibition was in the agreement, he would try to enforce it. When FBI agents met with Belhovalak to ask that it be put in the plea deal, she said she would discuss it with Krischer. The provision was not added to the agreement. Of course it wasn't. What do you think, his lawyers were going to allow that to be added? Hell no, they weren't. Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers wrote this agreement. That's what all the evidence is pointing to. Krischer was just there as a passenger on the ship, right? To sign off on it. Epstein and his lawyers constructed this. They constructed the NPA, and the prosecution sat around with their thumb planted firmly right up their rear ends. While meeting with investigators, Krischer said granting a work release was within the control of the sheriff's office. Not my office. FDLE is also investigating the sheriff's office to determine why it violated its own policy that prohibits sex offenders from being put on work release and other unusual perks it offered Epstein. PBSO declined to comment for this story. Hell yeah, they declined to comment. They know. They know. And this investigation that is being initiated and looking into them, I really hope it bears some fruit. Do I think it will? Probably not. What do I always say about investigations that look into themselves? Usually a lot of political theater and just a cover your ass tactic. But hopefully, maybe one time, maybe just once, things will turn the other way. The gift of work release inflamed Villafana. When she learned in November 2008 that Epstein was being allowed to leave the stockade, she immediately contacted her bosses. Can I indict him now? She asked in an email. An FBI agent talked to the stockade's work release coordinator to try to find out why the request was approved, Villafana told investigators. The coordinator said he had been threatened with legal action if he did not allow Epstein to participate in the program. So, again, Epstein's lawyers, I kept my underpants on, Dershowitz and the rest of them, threatened this man, this agent of the court, this agent of law, with legal action if Epstein wasn't allowed to leave the house to go and leave the jail to go and molest other people and conduct whatever business he saw fit. Where was the government to protect this officer of the law? Where was the Department of Justice to step in? Sanction Epstein's lawyers. Revoke his deal and send him to prison forever. Where were they? Villafana maintained that it constituted a material breach of the non-prosecution agreement and told investigators she alerted Epstein's lawyers. Epstein was going to work at the Florida Science Foundation, a non-profit agency that he claimed awarded research grants. When he pleaded guilty and was sentenced, Epstein told Palm Beach County Circuit Judge Dale Dean Puccillo that it had existed for 15 years and he worked there every day. Villafana's research revealed that the foundation had been created just 12 months earlier. Further, it shared an address and phone number with Goldberger's law office. I mean, the judge got dog walked. He was half asleep probably throughout the whole case. He was worried about what his tea time over at Mar-a-Lago was. He's like, yeah, non-prosecution agreements? That sounds great. Will I be out of here by noon to go meet up with Biff and Buffy over at the golf club? Are these people for real? He had an office over at Goldberger's. He told the judge he'd been going there for 15 years, and in reality, the place only existed for 12 months. It appears that since day one, Goldberger and Krischer have been scheming to get Epstein out on work release, she told her supervisors in an email. Further, she wrote, Epstein was paying sheriff's deputies to guard him when he was at the foundation's office in downtown West Palm Beach. Oh yeah, I'm sure that they were getting paid to not watch him, to let him do whatever he wants. Have these cops come forward, the ones that were watching him? Has anyone talked to them? Have they been subpoenaed? I'd like to hear what they have to say, that's for sure. It appears that he is paying between $3,000 and $4,100 per week for this service, despite the work release rules barring anyone from the sheriff's office and the sheriff's office itself from having any business transactions with inmates while they're in the custody or supervision of the sheriff, she wrote. Oh yeah, a little double dip in. Let's wet our beaks from both sides of the dish. Palm Beach County, the jail system down there, the state prosecutor's office down there, they all need to be audited, they all need to be subpoenaed, and every single person who was involved needs to be dragged in front of FBI agents and put under oath. This is unbelievably sickening. Finally, she contacted the sheriff's office in hopes of convincing them to revoke Epstein's work release privileges because he had lied on the application. In addition to pointing out the dubious legitimacy of the foundation, Villafana said the foundation's vice president, who promised to supervise Epstein, lived in New York. There was no way he could monitor Epstein's daily activities, she said. They don't have to. They could just put all that shit down in paper and do whatever they want. The rest of us have to abide, right? We have to wear an ankle monitor. We have to have a guardian or whatever they decide you need to have. But Epstein? Nah, I'll hire a couple of deputies. I'll go to work and I'll continue to molest and abuse girls while the deputies sit downstairs, drink their coffee, have a Krispy Kreme, and talk about what they ate last night at the barbecue joint. The sheriff's office neither acknowledged nor responded to Villafana's letter, investigators said. Because of the way the non-prosecution was crafted, there was nothing federal prosecutors could do. Because work release was not anticipated, the NPA did not specifically address it, and the USAO was unable to foreclose Epstein from applying for admission to the program, it concluded. So again, the state dropped the ball, and the federal government dropped the ball originally by not prosecuting him themselves. They left it in the hands of the state, and this is what the result was. And if you think that Acosta's bosses didn't know that this was going to be the result, boy, I have an oceanfront property to sell you in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Prosecutors were also powerless to object when Epstein walked out of the stockade after serving just 13 months of the 18-month sentence. They had agreed he would be eligible for gain time. If it was federal, he wouldn't get any of that. He would have been not eligible for none of that. Mandatory sentences. Clink, clank, clunk. Enjoy the bologna sandwiches. Agreement kept secret. Investigators who interviewed more than 60 people and reviewed hundreds of thousands of documents also examined the thorny question of why survivors weren't notified of the non-prosecution agreement or told when Epstein was set to plead guilty. Oh, you know why they weren't told? Because it wouldn't have went over. It would have never occurred if they were told. Their lawyers wouldn't have let it happen. Epstein would have faced federal time, and we wouldn't have had to be here for the last, 14 straight months without missing a day talking about this. But here we are. So now the question becomes, what are we going to do to rectify this situation? What are we going to do to hold these people responsible? For survivors and the public, the lack of transparency was one of the most damaging oversights in the ill-conceived and poorly executed prosecution, investigators said. 100%. I wouldn't be here right now talking to you guys about this if it wasn't for the downright draconian nature of the federal government. That's what drew me into this, the way they handled this, the way they handled themselves. And I'm even more disgusted now than I have ever been by the conduct of those pieces of trash that were involved in this Jeffrey Epstein case from top to bottom. It created the misimpression that the government had colluded with Epstein's counsel to keep the agreement secret from the survivors, they wrote. The illusion? The misimpression? What? A federal judge in February 2019 ruled that federal prosecutors violated the Crime Rights Victims' Rights Act by not allowing survivors to comment on the non-prosecution agreement before it was signed. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals is now reviewing that decision. Now, remember, that's huge, folks. It still looms large as far as this part of the case, right? These older crimes, if they get rid of this NPA, it's a knockout blow to Epstein's whole entire organization. Because there is piles and piles of evidence that will send these people upriver forever. Prosecutors maintain that the women didn't have to be notified because Epstein was never charged in federal court. That's because you used a technicality and a workaround. You charged them in the state court so you didn't have to go through all of this rigmarole because you knew it would never fly. Again, that might sound cynical of me, but when we know everything that we have learned in 870 plus articles here together, how can you take any other look at this and not see the forest through the trees? Investigators said they did not find evidence that Acosta or any of his prosecutors hid the non-prosecution agreement from the survivors to protect Epstein or avoid public scrutiny. But they said survivors should have been alerted before Epstein appeared in circuit court to plead guilty. They concluded that the failure to do so stemmed from Acosta's decision to hand the reins to Krischer, which muddied lines of responsibility. And again, all the way from the top, this happened. They knew that Krischer wasn't capable of handling this. They knew that Krischer was going to get strong-armed, that they didn't have nowhere near the budget that the federal government has to go after cases like this, and they knew what the result was going to be. So they handed it off, used Acosta as the fall guy, and they used Krischer as the useful idiot. While Acosta said he expected the state's attorney's office to notify all of the survivors, neither Krischer nor Belhovalak were aware they had been given that responsibility. Oh yeah, not our responsibility. We're not telling anybody. Further, investigators said Krischer's office was dealing only with 3 of the young women, not the dozens who had been identified by federal prosecutors. Plausible deniability, right? Oh, we didn't have any idea. It's the federal government's fault. The federal government? Oh, it's the state's fault. Meanwhile, the survivors and the rest of us are all just sitting around like, we don't give a shit. Rectify it now. Fix it. We know it was wrong. So fix it now. Let's move forward and let's get the ball rolling. Let's get these people who were involved held accountable. But according to Florida law at the time, survivors were to be afforded the right to reasonable, accurate, and timely notice of and to be present at a defendant's plea and sentencing if they had requested it, investigators wrote. During Epstein's sentencing hearing, Judge Pachillo asked Belhovalak whether the survivors agreed with the plea deal. This is mind-boggling right here, folks. I have spoken to several myself, and I have spoken to counsel, through counsel, as to the other victim, and I believe, yes, Baholovac responded, according to a transcript of the hearing. So, all the dozens and dozens, she says they spoke to a couple of these victims. I don't believe it, okay? I'm just going to straight out say it. I don't believe it. I need to see proof of that. I don't trust Krischer's office. I don't trust Baholovac. I don't trust any of these people, to be honest. While meeting with investigators, however, she said she couldn't remember whether survivors were notified of the hearing. She noted that given the charge of solicitation of prostitution, they may not have technically been victims for purposes of notice under Florida law, but rather witnesses, investigators wrote. After reviewing the state's files, investigators said they could find no evidence that any survivor was notified of the plea hearing. That right there should take the 11th Circuit Court's job to a nice, easy level, right? Just let it slide right in, and we all know that these people were negligent. We all know that this non-prosecution agreement was trash, and we all know that it should be done away with. They blamed Acosta for the blunder. While he told the investigators he assumed survivors would have an opportunity to speak up at the state hearing. He took no action to assure that would happen. And that's where the federal government is being held responsible here by Courtney Wild. They were negligent in their duty. The girls were not afforded the rights that were given to them under the Victims' Rights Act. And now there needs to be redress. Another gaffe that was laid squarely on Acosta was the decision to grant immunity to 4 of Epstein's assistants and any potential co-conspirators. It is just mind-boggling that ever occurred. I get so angry every time I think about this non-prosecution agreement and the fact that these people were afforded such protections. And again, while I hate Acosta and I think he's a scuzzbag, I can't drive home the point enough. Let's focus our rage where it belongs, and that's up the ladder. Because these fall guys, they'll just be replaced by another stooge, another useful idiot. Such a sweeping measure, based on no evidence, was inexplicable, investigators said. It was even something strenuously demanded by Epstein's attorneys. Yeah, I wonder why. I wonder why Dershowitz and team would strenuously demand something like that. Huh. One unidentified federal prosecutor who specializes in sex crimes against children called it horrendous. Another said, I don't know how it is that you give immunity to somebody who's not identified. I don't know how that works. Yeah, me either, buddy. I ain't a prosecutor, but I agree there. I have no flippin' idea how that works. How the hell does that even go down? So if I get arrested for a crime, can I just claim that I'm afforded protection under Epstein's immunity deal? I'm one of Epstein's co-conspirators. I mean, come on, man. Acosta objected to being blamed for not making sure survivors were notified before Epstein's plea hearing. But his attorney told investigators he acknowledges that mistakes were made. Oh yeah, mistakes, huh? Some of the biggest mistakes we've ever seen in American courtrooms. You bunch of clowns, you clown fish. Holy cow. Deferring prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein to the state attorney rather than proceeding with a federal indictment or a federal plea was, in hindsight, poor judgment, his attorney told investigators. Acosta himself said the prosecution agreement relied too much on state authorities, who gave Epstein and his counsel too much wiggle room. If I was advising a fellow U.S. attorney today, I would say, think it through, he said. Oh, well, don't worry. You're not going to be advising anyone for anything anytime soon. Maybe your local township has a dog catcher role that is open to you, but I don't even think you'd win an election for that. So don't you worry. I don't think anyone wants any advice from you, Acosta, you spineless prick, you coward. This whole entire situation in Florida gives me agita. The heartburn builds up, and then it turns into white-hot rage. This non-prosecution agreement must be scattered into the 4 winds of time. And all of these people, local and federally, who were involved in this case, must be put under oath and must answer questions about their role and their complicity with Jeffrey Epstein and his attorneys to get him off of these charges. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI at protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. To everybody who has donated to the PayPal or the GoFundMe, the Patreon, thank you folks very much. All right, everybody, I will be back tomorrow morning, and we will pick back up where we left off. I hope you all have a great Sunday night, and I will see you all tomorrow.